Well, hello to everyone who's joined us today. My name is Rhonda Hull, and today I have the privilege of interviewing Michele McGehee. And she has been brave enough to agree to share a conversation about death and dying. And death and dying is often a topic that's somewhat of a taboo that people feel uncomfortable about. And yet, for me, death and loss become the part of life that reminds us to live present moment and live life fully. And so I feel that, there's a Buddhist practice that if you reflect on death often, it's a meditation. It allows you to become more present moment. So I'm grateful to our listeners who have joined us today. And Michele, I'll let you start today by sharing with us a little bit about who you are as an individual, and then what your work is in the world and where you feel called to contribute your gifts. So if you'll introduce yourself to our listeners, that would be wonderful.
Great. Thank you, Rhonda. Hi, Michele McGehee. A little bit about myself. I have, of course, number one, I'm a mother and a wife. I have worked in the healthcare industry for, I want to say 30 years in the IT world, but I've worked in hospitals and building patient education programs and electronic health records. And I've kind of done a little bit of everything in that world. But I truly have a passion around health, well-being, and natural health. So I am also a health and wellness coach, board certified health and wellness coach. And I have a small practice that I really empower people to live the best life they can from all aspects of health and wellness. So that's a little bit about who I am. Like I said, I'm a mother. I have 2 adult children and grandchildren, and my son, who I will be talking about.
Great. I know somehow we're getting, I'm noticing, are you getting messages that come in?
I am, and I'm desperately trying to turn them off, so my apologies.
That's okay. If you can, great, and if not, we'll just be human together.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't want you to be anxious about it. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't on my end. So Michele, I want to start our conversation, I guess, by asking you, we live life, and periodically death in some way touches our lives. So let me ask you, by when you were a little girl, what was your first recollection or interest or inquisitiveness about death? Can you ever think back on when you were a small child and how death touched your life?
I can, and I know a specific situation that happened. My grandfather, who was in his 80s, and I want to say I was around 7 or 8, but everything I remember is 7 and 8 back then. So
yes,
I was around that age. And my grandfather, who was in his 80s, had, or maybe late 70s, had a few heart attacks, and he was in and out of the hospital. And I'll never forget the day that we got the call that he passed away. And it really impacted me because for somebody that age, my life changed. Everything stopped. My parents all of a sudden were, pulled into this whole experience, not a happy experience, a sad experience. And seeing that from a young age was really impactful for me. It was like, oh, wow, this is a bad thing. It was like something serious happened. Now my grandmother's by herself, and there's a lot of sadness and tears, and I was just kind of processing that. But even before that, I have to say I've since very young, I've always had a hard time saying goodbye. And I like going on a camping trip, and no, this has nothing to do with death, but it's going on a camping trip with family, friends, and then having to say goodbye at the end of the weekend. I was always very sad and very like, oh, I'll never be able to see them again. And I remember like crying in the camper going home, or being that horrible sadness that this is going to end. And that's what I felt when my grandfather passed away, but even more intense than
Right.
that. It was like this ending of something. And I don't think I actually could contemplate at that age what that meant. So it truly had an impact. The other thing that had an impact in my life as a young child is we didn't go to church a lot, but I did go to church with family friends here and there. And my grandparents were very devoted to their religion. And the idea of heaven and hell and death scared the bejeebies out of me.
Yeah.
It just, being a bad person, and you're going to be living in hell for the rest of your life. And again, this is my interpretation going back when I was 6 or 7 years old.
Right.
And it really has held like, a very valid spot in my life and who I am today.
Well, I sometimes wonder what would we conjure up in our minds, our story about death, if we had absolutely no influence by our religion, the what we've been indoctrinated into. What would we make up independently as what all of that meant? The indigenous cultures, death is such a natural part of life. And I think that when we've imposed religion on it, it becomes far more layered in what our beliefs evolve to be,
Mm-hmm. Like I said, we've never been, we're not a real religious family. It wasn't something that we went to Sunday, or, just to church on Sundays. But I did go to Sunday school here and there along the way with friends, and like I said, in families. And it definitely, even at a young age, I was questioning, what does this mean? What does this look like?
Right. And when, a fear-based layer is put on it, it creates more fear as a little child, as you're wondering about what happens around death. And so, your story about going camping, it's a loss. You're wondering, will you ever have it again? And I think that is something we go through when we lose a loved one, whether it's, until next year's camping trip or when we actually have someone pass close to us. So as you matured, tell us a little bit about how death impacted your life. And are there any, other than your grandfather's passing, how has death impacted your life? And what are those specific moments that have made your reflections on death just expand?
So I'll talk a little bit about as I mature, and then I'll go into that experience. With my younger years, and my grandmother, of course, passing away later on, and just going through that, I had so many questions as an adult of like, what is reality? What does this look like? I went down the path of religion. I went down the path of kind of new age. I read a lot about spirituality, mind, body, spirit, living, dying. I have a bookshelf of information around that because it's just fascinated to me. And I do apologize for that. I can't figure out how to turn everything.
That's okay.
So, I'm just a curious person, especially around spirituality and life itself. But my son came into the world in, I should know this off the top of my head, 1994. And at 2 years of age, he was diagnosed with a rare terminal disease. He was born with something called mucopolysaccharidosis type 2. And that.
How old were you when he was born?
I was 28.
28. And he was your first?
He was my third. He was my third. Maybe I was 30. I should know that.
No.
I was there somewhere between 20 and been 30, I think. And he was born and everything is great. And I started noticing changes, and it was a long process of being diagnosed. And I'll never forget the day when I did get that diagnosis. I was at Seattle Children's, sitting there, not knowing that this was going to come to me. We were there for something completely different. And hearing that it is a terminal disease. And of course, this is back in the 1990s. So a lot of things have changed since then. But
Right.
he would be lucky to make it to 8 years old. And he was about 2 at the time. And, I look back now, he has passed, and I can talk a little more about that, but that changed my whole perspective on life and living.
Yes.
He went from a very active young boy who had special needs. I mean, he was having hearing problems and he was having mobility problems, to a child that just slowly, the disease slowly took over, from eating and walking and communication and everything that goes along with that.
Right.
He passed away at 16 years old.
Wow. So you definitely beat the odds there, just in terms of the length of time he lived. We
did. But with that diagnosis, I had to look at death and saying goodbye for all those years.
I have a grandnephew who is now 17. And when he was barely 2, he was airlifted from Alaska down to Children's Seattle, and went through a bone marrow transplant, and fortunately is still here. And yet my niece and I have that conversation about all of the challenges that you face. It's that waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so it's true, you're grieving and experiencing a loss, even when they're right there. And it's over and over again. So it's like pulling off a Band-Aid, so painfully slow. But I can really relate to what you're saying about living through, sitting in that vat of uncertainty, and trying to pay attention to the diagnosis and ignore the diagnosis all in one breath.
And it gave, really struggled with, the whole idea of living life with this. I mean, it's no different than, I will die at some point in time. I know that, but having that diagnosis and then trying to live a normal life. And we even got to a point where in the mornings we would go in and go, oh, I hope he's still, alive. Every day was like that, even though we were far off from his actual death and his transition. We lived that life, and it really, like I said, it really makes a mother do some soul searching. I think anybody, but for me, it was really, what does this mean? What does this look like? And having to look at life and death, quality of life versus quantity of life.
Yes. Yeah.
And trying to live a normal life in this situation and trying to define what normal is.
Yeah. I'll never forget one experience with my niece where my grandnephew Connor could not go into crowded spaces. And I can't remember whether it was pre-transplant where we had to keep him in a bubble, but he could, or whether it was post, but we couldn't have him in crowded places. And we were walking past the Space Needle, and my niece said, it's not crowded today. Do you want to take him to the top of the Space Needle? And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, at that point, I think it was $16 to go to the top of the Space Needle. And I think, well, no, that's okay. We don't have to take him up. And he's 3, and she took my shoulders and she looked in my eyes and she said, they call me Bobo. Bobo, Connor could be dead tomorrow. Now, do you want to go to the top of the Space Needle? And it was that, well, of course, so good or bad, it causes us to go for the experience in the moment. And, money be damned. Sometimes that's not such a great decision-making gauge. but it resets your focus on what's important and what's not.
Yep. 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 It's interesting because it makes me think about that as well. Like I want to do the same situation. I wanted to do things with David to the best of our ability. He was the same way. He didn't like crowds. He didn't like shopping. It just information overload for him.
Right.
And we found things that we could do with him that would give us all a normal life, if you will, and
right.
integrate that. But it was, I look back now and think, I don't know how I did it. I was trying to figure out how many years it's been. He died in 2000. So it's been 12 years since he's passed. And to this day, I can still it gives me this feeling of like, oh, I don't know how to explain it. Of course, with his passing, but just the thought of living with that idea of death and having to say goodbye. And
right.
If you get into the spiritual side of things, there was lessons to be learned and those types of things. But
yeah, how did your other children manage that whole phase of your life and his ultimate passing?
Yeah, I think there was some time or age difference between my oldest daughter and my son. And then, my middle daughter, it was rough for her. He was in school literally across the hall from my daughter, and he had horrible pain at sometimes in his life, and he would scream and he would holler. Yeah. And I remember her coming home with stories and sadness about how, like teachers like, oh, we got to keep them quiet. I can't believe they can't keep those kids quiet, not knowing that her brother was her brother. And just, living in that intensity of knowing that, this is not normal. I can't even understand where she, how she was feeling as a young child. I can only imagine and kind of think from her perspective, but it was not easy. And there was a lot of, it was not an, if you want to call, when we got the diagnosis to when he passed, it was not an easy death. It was a very long death. It was very, painful death to watch. As the disease basically took over his body.
Right.
So, as you think about death.
Did you feel compassionately supported by the medical community as you walked this journey?
Oh, parts of it, yes. We had an amazing support of this one nurse who kind of managed the I think she managed the kind of the disease side of things. I can't remember what her role was, but she was very supportive, but being what she needed to do. She was preparing us for death. I remember her once telling me we had to go up there. There were some bad things going on. His body was basically shutting down slowly. And she says, you need to prepare yourself. It's not going to. But I remember learning about the diagnosis. I was in a room and a doctor came in and said, so your son has mucopolysaccharidosis. And I was there for hearing challenges. And I'm like, what? And it was you could tell he was like, oh, and he kind of slowly walked out of the room. And I feel bad for him today, but he didn't know, but it was a terrible shock. I'm sure it feels the same way when somebody hears that they have cancer or some, type of horrible disease.
So he thought he was there you thought he was there just to deliver an update on your son's hearing. And he comes in with this long word that you don't even know what it means. That means that he's terminal.
Terminal, yeah.
And what the doctor was able to at least tell you that before he backed out of the room?
Yep. And then I was like, what are you talking? I'm here for hearing. I'll never forget it. I remember the room. I remember what I was looking at.
Yeah.
I had my three or my two, the three kids. I had three kids that, and it was, difficult to hear.
Were you alone, or did you have someone with you for that doctor's appointment?
I was alone, and I was living in Port Townsend at the time, so I had to drive back from Seattle Children's across the ferry. I mean, I think you live in that area.
Yeah, I live in Port Townsend.
Yeah, and it was probably the worst trip of my life. But
oh, bless your heart.
other than that, it's and this is a really interesting thing for me. This is I always have been kind of a natural health person. That's just who I don't know. I came into the world being that way. But it really pushed me to that, because as a mother, I heard, well, there's nothing, all we can do is treat the symptoms, and the disease will take over. And all we can do is make him comfortable. And in my mind, that was not acceptable. And so I went to the natural health world. And to this day, you can argue that, well, who knows? But for me, for my heart, I know that I did the best I could for him, for David. And I went to Bastyr, and I had an amazing person who helped me through that process in a natural way. She even did her thesis on David. And I do think it helped. I think it helped with the quality of life. I couldn't, as things were progressing, we definitely needed the allopathic world. We needed, the help. We even went through enzyme replacement therapy, which at the time was very new, to see if we could beat this thing. And I remember my husband telling me that, Michele, this is not a cure. This is, don't think of it as a cure. And in my mind, this very expensive therapy that was eating away at our health insurance was going to somehow save him. But, it extended his life a couple years. So I think with, what we did from a naturopathic perspective and an allopathic perspective, being, Western medicine, I do think we gave him that quality of life. Until the last, where things were really getting so bad that, we had to make that decision.
Were they able to manage his pain, manage palliative care, or no?
No, at that time, that the disease was so new. It was definitely a challenge. We were, at the time, we were throwing a lot of, there was a lot of medication going that direction.
Right.
And we changed his diet. So that naturopathic world, I think, really helped with, addressing the symptoms in a different way, like making sure that he ate in a specific way, and that like he couldn't digest carbs very well, so it gave him a lot of pain in his stomach. And he had joint pain, so relieving that joint pain with natural medicines and that type of thing. We used to do acupuncture on him. I've done a little bit of everything. So and at the last part of his life, he definitely was on some pain medications, because it was definitely getting, it was definitely consuming him.
With his illness, was he neurotypical, or did he have processing challenges or different learning challenges?
Yeah, he happened to, there are some people out there with mucopolysaccharidosis type 2 that live a fairly normal life. For David, it definitely was cognitive as well as physical. He probably, maybe a year and a half mind. I don't know. Personally, for me, I think he was more beyond that. I think he was like extraordinarily intelligent in more ways than I could even imagine. So it's hard for me to, like, in human world, he was low.
Right.
He was
exactly.
Like, to me, he was like my guru who came into this life and has given so much. So, but yeah, he was very small. And I think at the heaviest, he was 80 pounds, and he was 16. And by the time he passed, he was down into the 50s. So he wasn't real big.
Yeah. Well, so did he pass in the hospital, or was he at home?
He did not. So along the way, we were going to Children's on a weekly basis for the enzyme replacement therapy, and not getting into the, a lot of, like, we were eating up our insurance, and
Yeah.
wait a second, we have to do something different. So they trained me how to give him his enzyme replacement therapy at home, which was an infusion. So we had hospital, I mean, we looked like a hospital at the time. And when he really started failing big time, we had him set up at the house.
Yeah.
And he passed at the house with his dad and myself. And my daughter, my youngest daughter, who lived in the area, and he was surrounded. I put music on, and the passing was quite extraordinary in my opinion. Now you have to remember, David was never very verbal. I mean, he could say little words like cow or milk or food or simple things, but hadn't talked in a long time. So David and I could care. I can't explain it. I don't feel that it's necessary, but we could communicate in a very different way, even miles away. I knew when he needed me. I knew when he was having a seizure. I knew, I can't explain it. But it continued during his passing. And the day that, the morning that he passed, it had been long. It was a waiting game for us for almost 3 weeks.
Right.
And we were just keeping him comfortable and spending time with him. And he was gone, but we were all
was hospice involved? Did you have?
We did,
support?
but I think it was, I probably knew more from just a management perspective.
Right.
I had spreadsheets and managing
Yes.
medications and, knowing how to do infusions and all of that. I really took that on myself, and I'm grateful that I could do that. I'm not saying that's the right way. I just was right for David and I.
Right.
But we did, so, they came in and helped us out as much as possible. But that morning, I remember I was sleeping, and I remember having a conversation with David that he's like, it's time now. I'm going to go, and I have things to do, and you have things to do. And I'm going to get choked up a little bit.
Yeah.
And they had an amazing, he kept telling me, you need to tell a story. You need to tell the story. So, so anyway, his I want to call it his spirit, whatever anybody believes. This is just my interpretation of what happened. It went away, and he was so excited. His spirit was so excited to do the next thing, and he was talking to me as this energy was moving away from me. And
Right.
I woke up and I said, David's gone, to everybody in the room. And they, and we all ran over there, and his body was still alive.
Right.
And about, I want to say 2 to 3 hours later, it finally shut down. And I knew that David's spirit, or again, this is my interpretation of it, had moved on. And his body was now, slowly letting go.
Yeah.
And going through that process.
It's about 2 years ago now that I had the privilege of being with my closest woman friend, who passed from rectal cancer. And it in her final night, it was a storm, a thunder and lightning storm. And it was at midnight, when the clap of lightning and thunder hit, that I knew Mary was gone. Her body continued shutting down until about 10 or so the next morning. But I knew that her spirit was free. And I experienced a near-death experience at 17. And so I know that for some people it's a stretch, or it's doesn't make sense, or in human world, it doesn't. And all of my experiences tell me another layer, a level of understanding of the spiritual energetic experience that happens, and that ability to transcend our five senses into a realm where you're communicating in a different way. And so for those who understand it and get it, and great. And for others, it's a more linear process. And I really appreciate you sharing both dimensions of what you experienced. So,
Yeah, I too, when I first got the diagnosis of David, it was a rough couple of years. It was just, there were 2 years we didn't even tell anybody what was going on, being family. And I had kind of that same experience. This is like, I can't do this. I cannot do this for somebody who can't say goodbye.
right.
Or, how am I going to be able to do this? And I really didn't think that as a person, I could live through this experience. And I was taking a nap, and I mean, again, was it a dream? Was it not? From my perspective, I know it happened, but I understand that, everybody has their own perspective on this. I literally left. I went somewhere out there.
Right.
I don't want to say how, and I remember like this amazing energy that just surrounded me with love. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. And everything went away, all the pain and the sorrow and the burden. And I remember I recognized people, or not people, they weren't people, it was energy. I recognized energy. And they're like, you're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be back down. And I'm like, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. And again, was this a dream? Was it not? For me,
right.
It was a true experience. And they're like, you have so much to do. You can't leave. You can't go. You can't go. And I remember literally coming through my head, the energy coming through my head. And I woke up and gasped. I mean, literally like that. And the heaviness in my body was like, oh my gosh. And I think that experience, again, whatever that is, helped me prepare for David's death. Because
yes,
I don't think I could have done it without that experience. Because from where I sit, I know David is, wherever he is, there is a tremendous amount of love around him.
yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, I think my near-death experience taught me that there is no there. It's an energy where you are able to access different energy. And so the challenging earthly experience you've been having is that, how do you believe when you're in this human 3D reality that there is no loss? And by giving you that experience, it wasn't easy, but you were able to better integrate the loss here,
Yeah.
So,
no,
wow.
that's so true. Having a conversation with some friends around a campfire, and I was trying to explain this, and they're like, how can you go against everything that everybody believe, that science has shown us? And it's like, I can't explain it, and I don't want to explain it, in the sense that it's not my job to explain it, I guess. I don't know, but it truly is. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think I know it's taken me a long time. I'm still integrating that experience, and it took me a long time. I never have felt like I fit in my body. I am definitely a proponent of quality rather than quantity.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like fear is what keeps us stuck on quantity rather than quality. And so my sense is, at least from my experience and hearing yours, is that, like you said, you're not done yet. There is something for you to do. And it's not necessarily to convince, but just to share your story. And that's why I am so grateful, because I find that people are hesitant to talk about death until you give them permission. And then you start hearing these incredible stories that, if they were spoken, would would allow us to expand our quality of life and be more intimate and connected while we're here. And, there are two things we share in life, birth and death. We're all born and we're all going to die at some point. And I think the general belief is that if you just don't talk about it, it's never going to happen to you. We want to go on pretending. And it's not that you have to focus on it and be morbid about it. It's about use it as the tool to be present here. So,
and in live your life to the fullest, whatever that means, that
right.
it's such a cliche, but making, making choices to live longer and healthier and, moving forward. With David, could he have lived another year if we had him on feeding tubes and managing his seizures with medication and mind you, that is, to me, is not a quality of life, even as hard as it was to make that decision. Right. I'm hoping that when it's my time, it will, I'll be able to say, it's not a quality of life at this point in time. I can't do the things that I enjoy doing. And mind you, it's easier to say that than when you're really facing death. I've thought about that a lot.
I have a couple of questions and I'll speak them both because at this point, sometimes one will go and then I go, what was the other one? How did this whole journey impact your relationship with your husband and your kids? And then the second question is, how has this experience, or really looking back on your grandfather's death, you're noticing how not wanting to say goodbye to people, your son's passing, how has that caused you to think about your own death and choices you would want to make in your planning?
So from a family dynamic perspective, my husband now was not David's father. He came into this world and into our lives knowing that this was going to happen. And
brave
that
soul.
To me, a brave soul. And it hasn't been easy. From David's transition death to me managing that and what it's done to me. So I have to say I commend him for that. I'd have to think twice about it for what he took on. And my daughters are doing well. They're in their 30s now and doing well, although I think it's probably impacted my middle daughter the most. But I can't talk. It would be interesting to hear her. We've talked about it, and but how it has impacted her, I'm not sure. I would hate to put words in her mouth. And then from what it's done for me, it's been a lot of soul searching, and I sometimes feel like it's getting to the point now where people that I meet today or my friends today don't know what I did when I went through back then. And it truly has impacted me. I think death impacts all of us, but having a child pass, it has impacted me, but it's made me much stronger in my beliefs and who I am, sometimes to a default of I try to stay away from the allopathic world for whatever reason. That's not my thing. I truly believe in living, as healthy of life as possible and staying active and, I'm not looking at age. I try not to look at age. I got into that world for a while and thinking, I'm getting older, I'm going to die soon. And that's been recent. And I was like, no way, am I not going to do that? And it really is because of my experiences in the past where I'm like, I'm going to shake things up. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this to myself. And I think that's been a challenge for the family because they're like, what are you doing? We moved out to the middle of kind of nowhere and I'm riding horses again and all these things that, people are like, why are you doing this? So I think it definitely has had an impact. Now, my husband and I are not on the same page with death and dying. I believe that there's far beyond what we can see. And he's more of a, when death happens, it's kind of over, and which is fine. That's,
Right.
Everybody has their own opinions, and that's their right as a human being to decide how they want to look at that. But for me, it's I continue to explore, or I don't know if it's the word is explore, but yeah, I explore or really think about life and living and death. And
Right. So
I
if you were to learn that you had a year left to live, what would your life be like right now?
That's a very, very good question. I would hate to know. And the reason I'm hesitating, I want to explain why I'm hesitating, is because I had to live with deaths for so long. Thinking about David's death, David just didn't all of a sudden pass away. It was like,
Right.
we lived that, and it almost gives me PTSD to
Think about.
think about, like, I have to know that I'm dying in a year. And I think that would happen to anybody, but it's like, I don't want to have that that label, if you will.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
And then you mentioned that you waited a couple of years before you told anyone, because I know that people who get a terminal diagnosis, and who, it's all a guess. We're all making it up. We're doing it based upon the best information we have. But you deal with that label. And then as soon as you tell everyone else, people are looking at you as the walking dead. They're hyper vigilant and fragile, thinking you're fragile and all of that. So
the whole world changes. Yeah, the whole world changes with that. Yeah, it's interesting. I think my mind is turning a little bit about that. But yeah, I would. But if it were, I wouldn't tell any. I mean, I that sounds horrible, but I'm a pretty private person in that area anyway. I don't know if I'd want to be treated any different. That would be what I would avoid the most. I guess that's, like I think about, getting God forbid, getting a diagnosis of cancer or something, which is,
right.
I don't want that.
So what would your ideal death be? If in the perfect situation where the time comes?
I think for everybody, I think it would be, you go to bed one night and you don't wake up the next morning, because that transition is a little bit easier in your sleep. I could, I being with my family and my horse, and, just being able to enjoy and transition. I think the most fear I have is pain.
Right.
In today's world, we can manage that, but I think that's probably the thing that I would hate to have the most. And, having that fear, and I'm hoping when it does happen to me that I've worked through that fear of death, and I embrace it. Like, I'm not scared to die. And I have to say that with a bit of a, like, disclaimer there, that I think all of us might have a little bit of, not like, just cut out and I'm going to die tomorrow. I'm fine with that.
Right.
I still have that tingle of, well, am I going to go to hell or am I going to go to heaven? And, am I really, maybe I'm crazy and there really isn't anything up there and it was just an imagination. So I do have that in my mind. I don't necessarily like drive 150 miles an hour thinking, oh, I don't care if I die.
Right.
But I'm excited for the trend, for the next stage of whatever this brings, and that's my belief system. And maybe, again, right or wrong for anybody else, it's right for me to think that I'll go on and I'll do other things, whatever that is. This is a body, and this is the vessel for my energy at this point in time. And I need to take care of this vessel and move forward in this life. But when it's time, I want to truly embrace it. I want to rejoice and celebrate. And our society doesn't necessarily allow that.
Right.
And,
Right.
and again, I might be generalizing. I hate, I don't like to put everything in a little bucket, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of even
Right.
money in death. And,
Yes. Yeah.
um,
That's
it's,
true. That's a
yeah.
whole nother conversation about it,
Yeah,
aspect
we don't
of
go down that path.
it.
But
Michele,
yeah, and even, yeah.
um, so what is the gift or the message that your son has gifted you with to share with us? And what are the most important things from that stepping out of your body to get that insight and come back in? What are the insights you have to help all of us make choices that give us greater peace around death and dying?
So I'll start with my son. And I have thought about that a lot. There's so many gifts, and it's not just for me. If you talk to people who really knew David,
Yeah.
everybody has said that he really came in. He really was a gift from heaven, a true angel. That there's, to live life to the fullest. And again, it's not about quantity. It's about quality. And the veil is thin. And for David, he used to look up in the corner and he used to sit there and laugh, just those belly laughs that were just
Right.
with this not poor, I shouldn't say poor, but this child who is suffering. He could look up, and I could swear he had like his guardian angels up there. You could almost feel the energy up there, and laugh, the belly laugh, that he could do that, knowing that, this is what he had. But, I really do believe that he came into this world to teach it for me. He was like I said, he truly taught me a lot about life and living and love. He was unconditional love. That kid had unconditional love.
Yeah.
And in that dying is just, it's a part of who we are. And I'll never forget that excitement once he left the body, the excitement to go on to,
Right.
because I think we think of death as the end all, that everything stops. And I guess, as I'm talking through this, and I apologize for rambling a little bit, but
No,
it is interesting, because I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for me and for people, is that, our body might end, but there's so much more out there for us to explore. And, again, I don't know what that looks like, but all I can explain is how the experiences that I had.
Right.
So
right.
And I think that's, the lesson that I have learned from David, and that I can say goodbye. And to this day, I can still say, I love you, David, and I can feel it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't go away. I love you, Grandpa, who I didn't know, I knew, but, it's been so long, and I can feel it. So, our energy continues, our spirit can, however you want it, our soul,
Yeah.
continues.
It's the grand adventure. I think in our human capacity, our brain or mind doesn't allow us to completely understand. And so I think if there's any lesson in COVID, for me, it's the reminder to develop our capacity to be with uncertainty. And, when you want to hang on and not experience loss, you want to have something to control, So
Yep.
you went through an experience where for all of those years you had to live in uncertainty. And some days
Yeah.
were good and others weren't. And, so forgiveness, compassion, there's so much. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this conversation that to me will serve other parents who are faced with a terminal diagnosis for their children, people who've experienced loss, people who have questions about spirituality, loss, grief, dying, letting go, all of that, by your courage to take all of the pieces of the puzzle and kind of sort through them and look for the edge pieces, to define it. I see it as a great benefit. So I'm really grateful to you for this conversation. And my hope is that you won't mind if I reach out to you in the future and we can chew on some of the other questions that may emerge from this. So.
No, I thank you. It's been a very thought-provoking conversation, and it's good for the soul. It's very healing for me to be able to talk about it and to make it real and to make it alive, if you will, in the conversation of our current world. It's lots going on and a lot of loss. So again, I very, very much appreciate the conversation, and I would love to continue the conversation. I think there's so much to say about the topic and what's out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michele. Deep
Thank
bow
you.
of gratitude.
Yeah, thank you.